This video is about 5 books that you must read as soon as possible. My friend Alexis asked for book recommendations, so these are 5 non-fiction books. First one is How to Develop a Perfect Memory by Dominic O'Brien. This is the first book that really had a huge impact on my life. I guess I read it when I was 18, found it by chance in the library. He was the first world memory champion. It's really a book about not just improving your memory, but about creativity and imagination, and it's a very, very easy to follow, easy to read, practical guide. It's out of print, but you can get it used secondhand on Amazon or whatever, quite easy to find. He's written loads of books since, which are basically variations on this one, but it's really worth getting this original one out of print, because this is by far the best written and the easiest to read. It's a fantastic book, and Dominic O'Brien was someone who had a particularly bad memory. He was did very badly at school. He was diagnosed with dyslexia, and this is just a very, very practical book about how to think, how to remember things, how memory works. So it's just so fascinating, such a wonderful book, and it's very, 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 very practical. Really worth reading. And the next book is Bucky Works. This is by J. Rodwin. It's called Bucky Works, Buckminster Fuller's Ideas for Today. Buckminster Fuller, I first heard of him, like I think a lot of people, when we heard about buckyballs, or sometimes called Buckminster Fullerene, or carbon C60, carbon 120. These are a third form of carbon. So we usually think of carbon as graphite, so sheets of carbon atoms, or we think of carbon as a crystal, diamond. But there is a third set of forms that have a very interesting shape. They're often called supermolecules because they have lots of atoms in. So carbon C60 is 60 atoms arranged in a football shape. If you imagine a football shape with each vertice, kind of corner of the football as having a carbon atom. Footballs are made of soccer balls for my American viewers. Footballs are made of pentagons and hexagons, and fits together in this amazing shape, and they're very special properties. And since then, loads of those different forms have been discovered, and the reason why they're called Buckminster Fullerene or buckyballs is that Buckminster Fuller was he was a polymath, but he was particularly an architect and an engineer and a philosopher, and he popularised the geodesic dome, which is essentially a dome usually made of triangles. So it's usually based on a shape called an icosahedron, which is 20 triangles stuck together in a ball shape. And this book, Bucky Works, it's a very, very easy read. Lots of good photos and illustrations. Buckminster Fuller was born in 1895 and died in 1983, I believe. So he lived 88 years, and in those 88 years he did more than basically anyone who's ever lived, possibly with the exception of Leonardo da Vinci. Possibly. Although I think about it, Bucky probably did more. A lot of his ideas have still not been implemented properly, particularly the geodesic dome that he promoted. We should have domes everywhere. Also the octet truss, which we see a lot now in buildings, but again, it's not being well used. It's not working properly. the space frame. We see that a lot in buildings as well, which is, if you can imagine an octet truss, but spread out flat, that's a space frame. Next book is Using Your Brain for Change by Richard Bandler. This is basically, Richard Bandler is a co-creator of a pseudoscience thing called neurolinguistic programming. There's a lot of nonsense around neurolinguistic programming, and a lot of it is nonsense. But this book is basically, from the early days, the kind of the purest bit without all the junk. This was recommended to me by my martial art teacher Paul Harper, and his words were something like, just ignore the hype, get this book and make up your own mind. It's an amazing book just about what makes us think the things we think, what makes us feel the things we do, we feel. And this book is really about how you can, by conscious effort, you can use your brain to change how you think and how you feel. My favourite quote of all time probably is from a guy called Jim Rohn, who said, every once in a while you need to ask yourself 3 questions. Who am I with? Like, who am I spending my time with? What are they doing to me? Consciously and subconsciously, what are they doing kind of purposefully and without meaning to? And number 3, am I okay with that? So this book is really, for me, kind of embodies a lot of the ideas of those 3 questions. And it's just a fantastic book. It really is one of those books that you read it and you think, oh, I wish I had read this a long, long, long time ago. It's well written, easy to read. It's a book that has, I guess, more questions than answers, but asking yourself the kind of questions in this book is a lot more valuable than someone spoon-feeding you an answer. And there's practical stuff you can do in here. So, a way to talk about non-hypey neurolinguistic programming is basically the non-hypey stuff has now been called other stuff. So you'll hear people talk about mindfulness, you'll hear people talk about cognitive behavioural therapy, and basically a lot of that is stuff that Richard Bandler came up with, and his partner, whose name escapes me at the moment. Basically the stuff without the hype has now been called other stuff. Fantastic book. Out of print, but you can get it used on Amazon. Very worth getting. And then 2 kind of non-technical tech books. This book, Tools for Thought, The History and Future of Mind-Expanding Technology by Howard Rheingold. This was written in the mid-1980s, updated a bit in, I guess, the mid-1990s. Really worth reading. Howard Rheingold is one of those non-technical people who writes books about technologies, just a journalist kind of guy. This book is just about where computing came from, where it could be headed. A bit like the Bucky Works book, there's a lot of great ideas in the past technologies that we still are not using properly now, or not using at all, ideas that we've forgotten. Sometimes it's because the things were not practical at the time. So with computing, a big example of that would be people had awesome ideas about how to use computers in the 60s and 70s, but the computing power wasn't there. Well, on average, every 18 months, computing power doubles for the kind of same cost, not necessarily economic cost, but power cost and that kind of thing. This is referred to as Moore's law. So, computers now are so much faster, and memory is so much cheaper and so much bigger than it was just a couple of years ago. 18 months ago, the computer that you buy now cost double the price 18 months ago, or the computer you buy now had half the computing power 18 months ago, or any kind of point within that continuum of price versus performance. So there's so much value to be got in kind of reading this kind of book. One of the main points of this book is that the computer revolution hasn't happened yet. Now, he was saying that in the mid-1980s. It still hasn't happened yet. We're still using computers in the worst possible way, really. We're using computers to do things that we're better at doing than computers, and we're not using computers in ways to help us do things we're particularly poor at doing. Humans, for example, are bad at comparing things when we can't see the things, and computers therefore should have a lot of software functionality to help us compare things, like compare different documents on screen, and yet there's just almost no software that does that, and the software that does it is not particularly good. It's not standard. The functionality should just be built into every computer, so you turn it on and all the functionality should be there for comparing things. So comparing two text documents to see which one quotes the other one, for example, to be able to see quotations in their original context, to be able to, let's say if you're writing a letter, to have multiple versions of the letter on the screen at once, with maybe lines linking the text in the different parts of the different letters to show what was the same and what you've changed. So Tools for Thought is about that kind of thing, really worth reading. And it's written in kind of at least a semi-narrative style. Geeks Bearing Gifts, How the Computer World Got This Way by Ted Nelson. Ted Nelson is one of the people who is in the book Tools for Thought. There's a whole chapter on his work. This is, of course, Bill Gates, when he was got caught by the police for, I think it was speeding or something, and obviously he's grinning like a madman because he was just in the stages at this time, I think, of founding Microsoft, and he knew what the future held in store. Now, I'm not a fan of his software, or him particularly, but he at least saw some of the potential. This book, very easy to read. It's not written in a narrative form, it's written in a form of short entries, but it is written sort of in chronological order, in that it starts back with like hieroglyphics and different writing systems and different ways of storing and recording knowledge, and goes through the invention of the mainframe and the PC, and early internet, and then the web. Ted Nelson is very, very critical of the web and how it works and how it's used, and is very bitter about it, because his ideas were far more advanced than what we have with the web. And Tim Berners-Lee, who made the web in the late 1980s, he made an internal web at CERN, and then released it to the public in 1992. He was inspired a lot by Ted Nelson's work, but sort of misunderstood various aspects of it. So that's book number 5. Please do take a look. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, you could maybe make a donation to support my cancer fund, because I have stage 4 terminal cancer. The website is matthewdons.org. I'll do another book video soon. Thank you ever so much for listening and watching.